If you have ever played small to make other people feel comfortable, or maybe stayed in a bad relationship or job too long because you didn't think you could do any better, I wrote a book for you. It's called Becoming a Woman of Value: How to Thrive in Life and Love. Each of the 30 chapters contains a life lesson, a story, and an exercise to bring you closer to reaching your full potential. Becoming a Woman of Value is available on Amazon in paperback and Kindle.
You're listening to the Woman of Value podcast. You are about to hear the story of a woman who is following her dreams and passions and creating positive change in the world.
I was undervalued and underappreciated, and I lowered my worth to try to get their approval and validation. And it just ended up being a great company for almost everybody else that worked there, but a toxic environment for me. And I stayed in this role for 3 years. So towards the end of that experience, I had formed anxiety disorders, autoimmune disease. My hair was falling out in clumps. But as like most women I've talked to, I was resilient. I woke up every day. I was like, oh, today's going to be a better day. I'm going to power through this, until the one day that I couldn't.
Becca Powers is an award-winning high-tech sales executive and a motivational speaker. She has over 20 years of experience, and her career boasts Fortune 500 giants like Dell and Cisco. She grew up with musician parents who flirted with addiction. She dropped out of college, and she became a single parent of 2 kids by the age of 28. Her guts and grit journey to success reaches beyond business. As a motivational speaker, she empowers women to prioritize themselves for a more fulfilling and joyful life. And she is the author of Harness Your Inner CEO. If you're watching on video, you can see a copy of it here. And Becca's got a giant copy behind her. Welcome to the show, Becca.
Yeah. Thank you, Sandy, for having me. Happy to be here.
Happy to have you. So I always ask my guests this question first. What does woman of value mean to you?
So women of value, I did read that, like getting prepped for it. I was like, oh, what am I going to say? I think women of value means to me is helping women understand that we are worthy just because we are. We were born with our value. We were born with our worth, and that it doesn't need to be proven. It's inherent. So that's what kind of came up for me as I was thinking of what does women of value mean? And so, as a title, I say that we are all valuable, we're all worthy, and we are all meant to be here. So love your title.
Thank you. And I love your description. It's hard for people to wrap their heads around it, especially when they've grown up feeling that they are not worthy unless they prove their worth.
Mm-hmm.
And I think it's taken me a long time to realize that you are. And a lot of life is about taking off all the muck we put on to cover up our worth because we're so busy trying to please other people and do what we think other people think we should do instead of trusting ourselves. And so I would say, like, even a lot of the work I do with my clients is really helping them to believe in themselves.
Yeah, it's very important work. And I think that's where we get to shift the world when we are working one woman at a time, right?
Yeah.
I really believe that too.
Mm-hmm.
It's important.
Yeah, totally. So what is that moment, that pivotal moment in your life where you really began to feel like a woman of value, to really feel your own worth?
It's interesting because it comes from one of my moments where my most empowered moment came from my most disempowered moment. And they were all within about 5 or 10 minutes of each other. So I'll share that story if it's okay. So I've been, as you said in the intro, I've been in Fortune 500 a long time, sales leader, etc. And I was working in a company that I was undervalued and underappreciated, and I lowered my worth to try to get their approval and validation. And it just ended up being a great company for almost everybody else that worked there, but a toxic environment for me. And I stayed in this role for 3 years. So towards the end of that experience, I had formed anxiety disorders, autoimmune disease. My hair was falling out in clumps. But as like most women I've talked to, I was resilient. I woke up every day. I was like, oh, today's going to be a better day. I'm going to power through this, until the one day that I couldn't. I had a really bad day at work. I ended up coming home and doing all the mom things and just completely exhausted. And by the time I got to bed and started to wash my face, I hit a complete level of disempowerment. I was defeated, actually. And I hit the bathroom floor on my knees and started crying. And I did my moment of reaching out to universe, God, like, hello, I need help. Whatever I'm doing isn't working. I don't have any more answers. I can't power through. And I need another way. And that's all I knew. And almost I call it my instant miracle, almost instantaneously, at that same time of like being the most defeated I've ever felt in my life, my instant miracle came through in the form of a memory, and a thought came forward from years before, which ended up being like the inspiration for the book. When I resigned from Dell to go to this company I'm referring to, my VP of sales at the time said, I'm really proud of you. You're CEO of your life. And that really resonated with me. So here I am, Sandy, I'm on the bathroom floor crying and praying and doing all sorts of things. And that thought came back. And then all of a sudden I was like, oh my God, I'm the CEO of my life. And then I went from crying to laughing, because I was like, well, if I'm the CEO of my life, then why am I crying on the bathroom floor? I happen to have a lot more power in this than I think I have. And in that moment, I rose off that floor, extremely empowered and a much different woman than who went down.
I think that a lot of us, again, don't realize that we're empowered. We have choices. And I love that you were able to see that you actually could take charge of your life, and you were then empowered. I remember when I became a dating coach and somebody said, you're the CEO of your love life. You get to figure out who you want to hire and fire. And it's like, oh, yeah, I'm expecting to be chosen and waiting for somebody passively to choose me, but I actually get to be a chooser as well. And I think it's true of all of our life.
Yeah, that's it. And that's like, even you saying that back to me feels so empowering. It's like, yeah, you're the CEO of your love life.
That's right. Damn right.
Exactly.
So you had this moment, and then what happened?
So then I had to put my life back together, is the honest answer. But it really started with realizing that if I did one more day of allowing my self-worth to be in the toilet, if I did one more day of saying yes to everyone else except for myself, that my life was going to continue to fall apart. And it already, I mean, my hair was falling out in clumps, and I had already hit the bathroom floor. So there wasn't much more lower to go besides maybe the hospital. So that next morning, I woke up and I called one of my like good work friends. And I always say, like, it's so important to have a support network of people who truly like love and get you, because I call my friend, and meanwhile, for the past 3 years of this experience, she was like, you don't deserve to be there. You're Becca Powers. What are you doing? Like, totally just didn't understand what I was doing. And I don't think I did either. But so I call her and I'm like, hey, I got clarity. I got this message. And she's like, you know what? I'm so glad you're finally like realizing who you are. I'm going to make some phone calls and see if I can find you another job and get you back into like the Dell world where I was. And I was like, okay, whatever. And that phone call ended up being my segue out of that toxic environment into a role that fully supported me. But in between, that was a couple months process. In between getting from point A to point B, I had to start saying no to other people so I could say yes to myself. And I had to find myself again, was the first part of the process.
Yeah, so that no and yes, knowing what to say yes to, what to say no to is so important.
It is. And takes
Um,
practice.
it totally does. Saying yes to yourself because you have to believe that you're worth saying yes to. And what are you saying yes to? So we have values that we protect. When you're constantly saying yes, you're actually, in that people pleasing mode, which, not surprising growing up with addictive parents,
Yes.
that you became the yes person to survive because it is a survival skill, that people pleasing, anything where I'll become anything for anybody just to
Yes.
not die, basically. We don't see it that way until we have perspective. So when you have that bathroom floor moment and you go, okay, the cost is too high for me
That's
to
it.
keep
The cost was too
saying,
high.
yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. So how did you know what to say yes and no to?
I mentioned that it took a little bit of practice, but what I first started doing was pausing. And now I say words like, does this serve me or does this sabotage me? But then I wasn't as sophisticated. I just wanted to know, like, does this hurt me further? Like, that's all I was able to really comprehend. Like, if I say yes to taking on this meeting, or if I say yes to taking on this project, or if I say yes to picking all the kids up from practice, am I going to end up back on the bathroom floor? Because I did not want to be back there again. And I was easily able to say yes or no to that question. And so if the answer was yes, this would get me closer to the bathroom floor, then I had to say no. And that it took me a while to get comfortable enough to just say no to things. Like, normally I'd be like, oh, my plate's a little full, but maybe you can ask someone else. But that works. So for any listeners too that are like, oh, this is an intriguing conversation, but where do I start? Often for me, it started just kind of like moving the attention off me, maybe to somebody else. Like, I didn't know where it was going to go, but it's not on me.
Yeah, and I think that's a really important point, because often we feel like we have to make all these changes really quickly, and we have to know, it takes courage. We have to know what to say yes and what to say no to. And I find that a lot of times it's also, we can do part of what somebody says. It's not, I can't
Yes.
do that at all, or I can do it in a different way. And
Yes.
I was just having this conversation with one of my clients, and it was like, I can't do that, but I can do this. And that's less harsh. It's because boundaries are not harsh. They're kind to you,
Yes.
first of all, but it's also a way of somebody really knowing who we are. And if we're not clear about that, we don't tell people who we are. We're being fake.
Yes. And then that inauthenticity was ultimately my destroyer. Right.
Yeah.
And the more I was able to start honoring myself and understanding what needs of mine needed to be met, I started healing and I started becoming more whole. And in that space of saying yes to myself and no to other things, or to your point, maybe it was an alteration from the way I used to do things, maybe a partial no and a partial yes. I started creating more space, and the more space and time that came into my life, I was able to reconnect with myself. And so we just talked about, like, we talked about the book, but like, I start off in personal power because I feel like you can't do anything if you're not coming from your place of personal power. But then what I found as, like, I guess my part two, or the second part of my healing journey, was passion. Like, once I had more time and space, I was able to reconnect with things that I love. I'm like, oh yeah, what do I love? I've been so busy focusing on what everybody else's love. What do I love? And I'm like, oh yeah, I love yoga. I love writing. I love this. I love that. And not that I got to get to everything that I loved, but the more I was able to touch on things that filled me up, I noticed that my healing improved, my happiness improved, and that life overall stopped feeling like it was crumbling on me, and that it was supporting me.
Totally. I've been working with one client in the business realm. Most of my clients are dating and relationship, but this one is business and life. And a lot of what the work has been learning to not be a people pleaser and learning to really get in touch with exactly what you're saying. And we just had a session this morning, and it was like she's saying no to projects that don't work for her. She is saying no to money coming in ways that will not feed her. It takes a lot of courage to do that. And she said, when I'm doing what I love, I just feel so good. And I feel like people notice and I'm like, yeah, because you're being you, like you're not being this fake version of you anymore. And we don't realize that when we expose more of who we are, we actually light up, and people love to be in the presence of people who are lit up. Like you can feel it.
Yes.
I can see you glowing.
Yeah, as you're
Because
saying that, my
yeah.
cheeks are starting. I'm like, yes, she's saying all the things.
Yeah. It's like until you're really in it, I think it's hard to really express it because people don't always see it. They don't really see, oh, this can't happen to me. But it can happen to anybody. And so you got in touch with your passions. You started getting out of the toxic and into what aligned with you and what you loved and what lit you up.
Mhm.
And then, so you left the work that
I
wasn't
did. And I
working.
had to make, and this I think is important too, for listeners to consider is that when you're in these pivotal places, I gave myself permission to just consider all possibilities. Like I'd been a regional sales manager for 5, 6, 7 years. I don't know, a long time. And it had been a very long time since I was in the sales role. But when I was mentioning that my friend was trying to connect me with a job lead, when that job lead came in, it was for an executive sales role, which is still what I'm doing. But what that means is that I would technically demote myself from sales leader, but instead sell to executives. So now I sell to director level up to C-suite. Those are my client base. But I wouldn't be a leader myself. And so that was a big ego thing I had to look at. I'm like, how much does having this title mean to me versus how much does having the freedom and flexibility of this other new role, what would that give me? And so I could have stayed in either mindset, but I chose to go. I was healing and I was doing things differently. So I chose to say, this seems to support what I want in my life, freedom, flexibility. And so I continued down that interview path. And this is what I have found. How we were just talking about personal power, then passion. I got a job offer for more money than I was making. And so I found that prosperity came as a result of me being able to stand in my personal power, get lit up and do the things that I love and enjoy. And then prosperity started showing up more plentiful than when I was in this restrictive mode of that toxic environment. So I just thought that was a really cool side effect. I was like, whoa, I made the decision. I'm going to demote myself technically and go into executive sales. And then the offer was for more than I was making. And I was like, hey, that really worked out.
That's it's a great story because you were expanding into the values that matter to you. And I think that we live in this like little scarcity place of, this is all I have. This is as good as it gets. And we do that in relationships and we do that at work. We do that with friendships. When we let go, so much is possible. And I love that you
Yes.
open to all possibilities, because if you didn't, you would have been very narrowly looking for work that had to align in a certain other way, but didn't really fulfill what you wanted.
Exactly. Exactly. And that was one of the, thank you for summarizing that, because I think that was one of my biggest lessons learned. And as I take on clients too, that's a space I encourage them to enter. Like I said, they can only enter that space. I can't do it for them. And it takes a heck of a lot of courage, like you were saying, but the results are so worth it.
You have to let go of that weight. It's like the yoke on your back that's keeping you safe, supposedly.
Mhm.
And safety can often keep you boxed in and it keeps you from growing. It keeps you from getting out of that box, which is where all the good stuff happens.
Exactly.
So this is a very inspirational story. And I know that you had been writing for a long time before you actually published, and you talk about that in your book. Tell us what prompted you to write this book. And I know it was this epiphany that came to you about your inner CEO, but how did you finally get this book written? And you were probably working full time while you were writing it.
I
Like,
was. It's
it's a big feat. I know,
It is
because
a
I
big
have a
feat.
book. So yeah, tell us.
Yeah, so I'd love to. One is that writing is a natural passion of mine. And I was talking about passion a little bit earlier, but I have been writing since I was a kid, song lyrics, poems, short stories, essays. Like I've loved to write, big into journal keeping. And, but I was always really afraid to share my work. Always, so I said I was a closet writer for a very long time. And after so much healing, I knew I had a story. Like I was able to prove to myself that I was able to have a framework that worked because I did it on myself. And then I took several clients through it and I was like, okay, like this framework works. So I felt very passionate. Passion is just a word I love to use a lot because I lean into it now, but I felt very passionate that this message had to be shared, that women, that anytime that you can share your healing in a way that can transform somebody else, I feel like needs to be shouted from the rooftop. So I was like, I have to find the courage to like sit down and write. So that was I had to get okay with myself. And that took a year. I'm not even joking. It took a long time. I was like, I'm going to do this one day. And then an opportunity happened. I like signed up for a writing group. And it was application based, and I had to send in some samples. And I was like, I don't know, like that self-confidence was kind of a little weak in me. I was like, I don't know if I'm going to get accepted. And I got accepted, and I got to write with 4 or 5 other authors who were writing their first book too. And that was just a really incredible experience because it gave me a platform for confidence that like I had some material that was going to do well. And once I had confidence, then I carved out the time. Like I wrote from 5:30 to 7 every morning for 6 months. And then during the editing process, the whole process was 18 months for me, but during the editing process, I still committed myself 5:30 to 7 every day, every weekday to get the process done. So,
Well, that is an important piece of it. And I think that people all often wait for the right moment to come, or when they are retired, or when they, when my kids are grown, or when, it's all the excuses we make. And often I have heard a story similar to yours where it's carving out that time early in the morning. If you want to do a project that is a passion project, you've got to commit to yourself, and that's part of the inner CEO is I'm a leader. I make commitments to myself and I keep them.
yes, exactly. But you mentioned another part that was really, especially me being a corporate gal and seeing so many people in my world wait to retirement until they write their book, until they get certified as a career coach or a life coach. And what I learned is exactly what you said. I was like cheering you on in silence. I was like, yes, you don't have to wait. There's this place of, I never knew both worlds could exist at the same time. And the moment, I call it the power of but the moment I allowed myself that it felt expansive. I felt liberated. And all of a sudden I had the time. I was like, I have the time. I have the time.
I make the time.
I make the time. Yes.
Yeah, it's the exercise too. People say, I don't have time. I don't have time. I mean, I've had this conversation with one of my children who's very busy with her kids. And yes, it is hard to carve the time out, but you have to prioritize yourself. And I know how important it was for me to have creative projects when I was raising my children, because otherwise I just would be exhausted at the end of the day. I mean, raising kids is a wonderful project, but what are you building for yourself? And
Yes.
how are you being a model for your children when a role model for them when you're not taking care of yourself. What you're teaching them is it's okay to fall apart. It's okay not to exercise or eat healthy. And that's not good for them or you. And it took me a long time to learn those lessons because I did not grow up with them either. But the other part that I also wanted to say is that you got support. So you didn't just say, I want to do this and I'm waiting for the confidence to do this. You also got support to do it because you wanted it to get birthed. And
Yes.
I think we often think we have to do it all ourselves. And you've mentioned support more than once in this conversation, in that phone call that you made to that person who was a support to you and helped you move out of this toxic environment, and also in the support that you got to work with other authors and get the support to write a book. It's very, very lonely to write a book by yourself and not to get feedback and not to have editors. And it takes people to help you
It
do big
does.
things in the world. And that's also part of being a CEO, right?
It is. And I realized that like having the life I wanted, the thriving life that I wanted, required support. And that's why I say it so much. It's like I'm an A plus, that A type of personality. I can get things done. I've been an executive myself. So I'm like, but that's like a pathway to burnout. The moment I started allowing support and building my team, so to speak, and I don't mean employees, I mean people who care about the work that I'm doing, that want to see me succeed, that care about my health and happiness, I'm able to reciprocate that back to their projects too. But you start to build a little community, and it is the most incredible thing, because now I can just make a phone call and be like, hey, either in a phone call and excitement, I can call my writing group. I actually did. I'm like, I want to do another book. Will you guys jump on the phone with me like every other week so I can read to you guys? And they're like, yeah, let's go. And one of them's like, I'll write a second one too. So that was exciting. But also in those moments of time where you are feeling your doubts of self-confidence, no matter how much you grow, you're always going to have moments where self-doubt creeps back in, or, something ruffles your feathers. And to be able to have a support network that you can call that can help, build you back up or reframe you almost instantly, whether I'm very big on coaches. I have my own coach. I'm big on mentorship. I'm even big on following influencers that I can get free information from, that are in the path that I like. So yes, support, I can geek out on that. That's a really big deal to me.
Yeah. It's, so you mentioned many ways that people can get support. I've been part of a mastermind group. I've had my own coaches. And the other thing is like marketing. So in my business, if I didn't have exposure or marketing, I would not have a business.
Sure.
And when you become a coach, they don't tell you like, how do you run a business? They tell you, here's all these great skills, but most programs do not give you the knowledge of how to grow a business. And so that I refuse to be a failure. And so I just said, what do I have to do to make this business thrive? I was not comfortable in front of a camera. I would never have had a podcast, let alone 2 podcasts, let alone done a TED Talk, write a book. All these things were not part of who I was, but they were part of my DNA. And I think that we often don't realize that being exposed out into the world is how we do succeed. We can't do it in a little vacuum. And so whether it's getting on a stage and speaking or writing or whatever it is that you need to do, get some support, figure out how to do it. And I've heard so many people with I can't, and I don't have these skills. You have them. I didn't have them. You didn't have them. Like you learn them because you want to get this message out into the world.
Yeah, exactly. Exactly. I didn't know how to write a book.
Right. Who knew?
I didn't know. I just knew I could, I think. And I did. And I did it successfully with the right team. Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So what is your vision for the future? What's in the future for you?
So I think that you'll resonate with this just by you're having 2 podcasts and building your own community. But in the last couple of weeks, I had to really ask myself that question, because I just got done off the coattails of my debut, and things were very clear when I, had book launch and, in my way, I'm like, this is what I'm doing. But as I come up for air now, and I'm like, well, where is this going? What am I looking to do? My answer is, I want to build an empire of empowered women. Like, that is what I want to build, a community. I want connection. And so that's kind of what I'm envisioning as my next phase over the next 5 years, is really building that empire.
Cool. So what does that look like?
Still TBD, but I will be launching my own podcast too, which will be titled The Empire of Empowered Women. And I really want to start interviewing women who, kind of like how you and I are talking, that have found their own secret sauce. And I think empowered women empower women. And I just want to kind of start there, and we'll see where it goes. I do have another book that I'm about to break ground on. I have the outline finished. And so, those are the two main things right now.
They're big. It's exciting.
Yeah. Two big projects.
Yeah. And totally aligned with what I do. So I love it.
Yeah, that's why I was like, this might resonate with you.
Yeah, just a tad. Well, the woman of value concept came because I was working with dating coaching clients and realizing that the part I loved most was not about flirting or any of the stuff that a lot of dating coaches teach. It's really how to become more empowered from within. And so many women that I was working with had given up their power in relationships, as I had, didn't know how to really show up more authentically in their lives, even with their children or their friends. Like, they were tolerating a lot of emotional abuse. And when you get the skills to be more empowered, you thrive. And when you're thriving, good things come. Just
you
like
make better
said,
decisions,
right? You make better choices, but like, you made more money when you were aligned. And so it's like you start to magnetize in the things in your life that are aligned with who you are. Yeah, and that's really the key.
Yeah. And very similarly, so my coaching clients end up being, a lot of times, we attract a lot of who we are, what fascinates us, right? So I have a lot of regional sales managers, executives, things like this. But what I have noticed as my common theme, and why I'm so passionate about building an empire, so to speak, is that regardless of how the woman is showing up on the outside, which typically is like a very power persona, on the inside, they're in abusive relationships, or they're in a work environment where they might have a fancy title, but they're not getting paid their value. You said, talk about value. They're not getting paid their worth. And I was fascinated by, like, once I started having enough clients to see a pattern, I was like, wow. So even powerful women are really on the inside struggling so much with self-worth, is what I realized it came down to.
Yeah.
And when I was able to, when we worked together and they came into their own awareness, that's what we do as coaches, but like, giving them some guidance and how they can get back in touch with their self-worth. They started being more empowered, making better choices. And then, I call them like the unders and overs. They were overcommitted, overextended, overstressed. They were underappreciated, undervalued, all those things. The overs and unders were gone. Then they were finding better relationships, making more money, taking dance classes, like things that just like blew my mind, and they're happy now.
Yeah.
And I'm like, wow, that's so cool.
I love the overs and unders. It's a great way to describe it. I totally get it. Two new clients that I have are both super successful women who are overworked, giving too much, taking care of everyone except themselves, and we don't learn the self-care piece and I am powerful just by being, not doing, like you said at the beginning.
Yes, exactly.
Yeah. Well, let's get into the lightning round. Are you ready?
Ready.
All right. Fill in the blank. I used to think I wasn't blank enough.
I wasn't good enough.
What
Yeah.
was the number one thing holding you back from becoming a woman of value?
My beliefs about myself. Yeah. That I couldn't, we talked about that. I can't, I can't, I don't, I don't have the support, or my schedule would never allow. I mean, I could come up with many excuses.
Mhm. Okay. What is the best advice you can give to a woman who wants to become more empowered?
You're worth it. You're worth it. And on the other side of where you are, if you put the time and effort into yourself, your life is going to blossom in ways, in the most magical and unexpected ways.
Beautiful. And what advice would you give to your younger self?
To spend more time filling up my own needs rather than others. That it's okay to prioritize myself. It's safe to prioritize myself. That's what I would tell myself.
Yeah, who would know that at a young
Yeah,
age?
nobody.
Uh, what is something that people often get wrong about you?
that that success, because it shows up on the outside, is my motivator.
So they believe,
Yeah, so they believe, like, for an example, even like my son, sometimes he's like, oh mom, you're so goal oriented, you're so success driven that you're missing out. I was like, no, I'm not. I'm actually more driven to expressing my authenticity, and that is an outward result of my inward stuff. But I think people see the outward and feel that that's where my attention is.
yeah, it's really important that people understand who you are and what drives you. I remember my son recently said, Mom, you want to control everything. And I said, I don't want to control everything. I want to be understood. And there's a big difference. I don't need to
Yes.
control. I don't like it when people get me wrong. And so if they don't get it right, because I was so misunderstood most of my life, that's like a thing I have to like drive somebody home with. Um, I just want to have that discussion that you've heard me and I've heard you, and we understand each other, instead of making up something like success is my motivator is a mistruth. And
Right.
it's like important to be seen for who you are.
Yeah, I agree.
So finally, final question is, how would you like to be remembered?
I would like to be remembered as someone who made a positive impact, who created positive change in the world at whatever level I'm capable of. But that's how I'd like to be remembered, that was my motivator, was creating a positive change and not the success piece.
Right. And it's okay to be successful
Yeah,
along
like
the
I'll
way,
take my
right?
success all day. I'll claim it, own it. It's a result of, right?
Right, but the why
The
is the
why.
positive change.
Yes.
And you are a person who's doing that on so many levels right now. So
Yeah.
yeah, I think a lot of people think that, you want to be remembered for something you're going to do 20 years down the road, and you're living it. And
Yes.
that's great. And it's really inspirational. So thank
Thank
you,
you.
Becca, for sharing your story and your successes and your motivation to succeed in life and not be stuck anymore in toxicity, but to reclaim your worth and start an empire of empowered women. I love it.
I know, it gives me the goosebumps. I'm like, I don't know where it's going exactly, but it's going to be great.
You don't need to know. And that's the other part, is like,
Yes.
when we let go of trying to make it look a certain way, all the good stuff happens. It's those little miracles and blossoming things that just grow
Yes.
when we open to how it shows up.
Agreed. Agreed.
So I know you have a freebies for us. Can you tell us a little
Mhm.
bit about that?
I do. So within Harness Your Inner CEO, I have a self-assessment in the first part, but more so, this is coming from, Sandy and I have talked about like personal power and that space of empowerment really being like the first step in the journey. And for me, what I've realized is a self-assessment. Like if a CEO was taking over an enterprise, the first thing they would do is assess all the departments and what's going on. So I have found that that's a great place to start. So for all the listeners, if you want to do a little bit of a self-assessment and see how well the enterprise of you is thriving, I'm giving you a free assessment. And I also have an article, How to Create Change When You Feel Stuck. Because if you do the assessment, and you're like, I want to make some change, then, maybe the article can help you create some change. So you can find that at beccapowers.com/podcast freebies. It will be in the show notes as well.
Yes, it will, as well as your podcast, beccapowers.com, your Facebook, your LinkedIn, your Instagram, and your TikTok. All the links will be there at thewomanofvalue.com. And if you look on the blog or the podcast page, you can find all of this. And thank you, Becca, for coming on the show and being a wonderful example of an inner CEO and a woman of value.
Yes, thank you, Sandy, for having me. It was a great conversation.
Yeah. So, and also, if you love our show, listeners, please rate, review, subscribe. This really means the world to the growth of the podcast, so more people can find us and we can continue to have great guests and be a woman of value.
If you would like to step more fully into your value, grab a free copy of The Ultimate Guide to Becoming a Woman of Value on my website, thewomanofvalue.com. Just click the link at the top of the homepage. And if you haven't already done so, be sure to click the subscribe button in your listening app. And if there's something in this episode that inspired you, please share it with others, because the more we share these inspirational stories, the more women of value we will have in this world. I'll see you next time.